Welcome. This is lecture number 20, and I'm going to pick up where I left off. Last time we were talking about parenting after the Holocaust. The point I was at in the last lecture number 19, was the difficulty for survivor parents being available for their children's emotional needs. It was an issue that was often raised by survivor parents during the interviews during the research study. Their inability to be sensitive emotionally to their children was a very common factor that was found in the study. Parents very often fell into two categories. According to one person who was interviewed, Nita placed her parents into two categories at least. Her mother, who decided that she wouldn't mourn her entire life, and her father, who was steeped in the past. And we see that very common with survivors. She saw her father's retreat into his inner world, reflecting in his inability to come out of the past. He was stuck in the past, and as a result, it made him very unavailable to her as a father. She said that I had no model of how one behaves at home. I didn't see how it was to be a mother. I began reading and working on myself, said one person, Naomi. While many survivors' parents themselves, many survivors became parents themselves at young ages, in order to rebuild some semblance of life, they did face obstacles. Not only did they, as young adults, have the usual problems of learning what it means to be a nurturing parent, but they also had the further burden of performing the function successfully while still being partially immersed in their own recent family trauma and tragedy. Another trend that we look at is communication patterns and their effect on the second generation. And here we'll take a look at some examples of different styles of communication. Without parents who could help her deal with her fears, said one survivor, and indeed her father even added to them. As a young mother, this woman, Fanny, passed on her fears and anger to her own children. Again, using these interviewees as examples of what was found in many others. And has been noted in the research, many survivor parents chose not to talk about their Holocaust experiences, preferring to keep the burdens of the past to themselves. Now, how does evidence of this silence reflect in the parenthood after the war? Was another aspect of the research. The other point that came up was the transmission of aggression and or distrust of the external environment to the offspring. Evidence was found of the transmission of distrust of the external environment. The belief that non-family members were not to be trusted. And this was especially true of Germans and Poles. Based upon the examples I've talked about, it appears as if distrust of non-family members, and especially Germans, continues to be a theme found in interviews with survivors and their descendants. Another aspect that was found as part of the study was a tendency of survivor parents to be over-involved and over-anxious concerning their children's lives. This was the final theme that was noted in how they interact as parents with their children, that was documented at least in this research. These behaviors can be interpreted as normal delayed reactions to an abnormal situation, according to the psychologist. Children of survivors' over-involvement and over-anxiousness in their lives was seen as a pattern. There was pressure put on by parents to be the perfect child, as one said, to be the perfect daughter. Around her parents' needs, her entire life was built on the importance of meeting her parents' needs. And for many of the survivors, over-involvement and anxiety concerning one's children appears to continue and reverberate for many years, even at times reaching the third generation. There is, however, evidence that once the younger generations were able to understand the source of this and deal with it, they could more openly express their anger or frustration, at least to some degree, thereby reducing one's negative effects. And so a final note of the research study, as we bring it to a close here, this paper, in summary, is an analysis of the approximately 100 testimonies that were looked at and interviews of Holocaust survivors. The themes that were identified and their relationships were looked at as far as being parents. The main themes, in summary, were identified as 1, the potential for emotional memory, 2, the salience of the family and focus of caring for each other, or the failure to do so. Number 3, the idealization of the parent or family unit. And 4, parental mistakes, the difficulties in understanding the parental decisions that were made during the Holocaust. In our opinion, said the authors of this study, these themes can be understood as types of preservation mechanisms that help the survivors preserve the memories of their families. Families that were so brutally threatened, attacked, and destroyed during the Holocaust. In addition, these themes help us to understand the ways in which the survivors construct their sense of self as children and later on as parents themselves, and how they construct this sense of parenthood as they recall and narrate stories of their traumatic family past. In this study, they analyzed more than 50 interviews with members of the second and third generation of Holocaust survivors. And with that group, they identified the following themes, again, in summarizing. Difficulty for survivor parents to be available for their children's emotional needs, communication patterns and their effect on the second generation, transmission of aggression or distrust to external environments of their children, and a tendency of the survivor parents to be over-involved and over-anxious concerning their children's lives. These motifs often appear in clinical literature of descendants of survivors. After the Holocaust, often it was very hard for survivors to reestablish their sense of parenthood, and this is because their own childhood experiences were outside the modern-day Western psychological ideas of what we would say is a normal childhood. And as a result of this, when the Holocaust victims did become parents, they often had their own sad, traumatic experiences to draw from only as guidance. Given that their parenting took place in a complexity of completely different social, cultural, and political context, that of Israel during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, it's no wonder that there were findings as this study shows. So our analysis in the study did not really include the examination of diaries and letters of survivors and victims, which could stand to shed additional light on this concept of parenthood. What these researchers did, however, was to create an initial global map that could be the foundation for further research. For example, one could start to test specific hypotheses by asking a series of questions, such as, do grandchildren whose grandparents survivors have emotional memories connected to a parental figure during the Holocaust deal with the past differently than the grandchildren of grandparents who do not have such emotional memories? What happened to the offspring of families in which parenthood collapsed during the Holocaust, as was cited in some, and so on and so on. Hopefully you have gotten a lot of really good basic information from this study and the magnitude which it reached. Based on the present state of research, it would be presumptuous for us to claim that this is a definitive study, that more research needs to be done to understand the full magnitude of the complexities of the issues affecting parenthood after the Holocaust. Thank you.